The sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the quiet apartment complex. It was one of those perfect summer afternoons where the air felt warm but not stifling, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the courtyard. The pool area, nestled at the heart of the property, shimmered invitingly under the sunlight. Its crystal-clear water reflected the blue sky above, making it an irresistible spot for anyone seeking relief from the heat. Marcus Johnson sat poolside, his tall frame relaxed in a lounge chair. He wore simple swim trunks and flip-flops, his muscular arms crossed behind his head as he leaned back to soak in the peaceful atmosphere. A paperback book rested on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in several minutes. Instead, his dark, brown eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the view of the neatly trimmed hedges and flower beds that surrounded the pool. This place brought back memories, good ones. Growing up here had been tough at times, but it had also shaped him into the man he was today. Now, decades later, Marcus owned this very same complex along with several others across the city. But today wasn't about business. It was about unwinding. He took a slow sip from his glass of lemonade, savoring its tangy sweetness. For once, there was no buzzing phone or urgent emails demanding his attention, just him, the sound of birds chirping nearby, and the occasional splash of water rippling against the edges of the pool. Life didn't get much better than this, he thought with a contented smile. But peace rarely lasts long in shared spaces like these. As Marcus settled deeper into his chair, closing his eyes momentarily, he heard the faint squeak of sandals approaching. Opening one eye slightly, he saw a woman walking toward the pool, her two young children trailing behind her. She looked to be in her mid-40s with bleached blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and oversized sunglasses perched on her nose. Her demeanor seemed hurried, almost agitated, as she spread out a colorful towel on one of the vacant chairs near. Marcus. Karen Wilson was her name, though Marcus didn't know that yet. To him, she was just another resident enjoying the amenities of the complex. At first glance, Karen appeared harmless enough, a typical suburban mom trying to keep her kids entertained during summer break. But there was something about the way she glanced around the pool area, her lips pressed tightly together, that hinted at underlying tension. Her sharp gaze swept past Marcus briefly, before settling on her children, who were already splashing, their feet in the shallow end of the pool. For a while, things remained calm. Karen busied herself applying sunscreen to her kids, occasionally calling out instructions to be careful or don't run. Marcus returned to his book, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every so often he caught Karen glancing his way, her expression unreadable behind those oversized glasses. Was she staring, or was he imagining it? Shaking off the thought, Marcus flipped another page, determined to enjoy his afternoon. Still, Karen's unease only grew. Sitting there alone, Marcus radiated confidence and ease, qualities that somehow made her feel even more unsettled. Maybe it was his presence itself, a black man lounging casually in what she considered her space, that triggered a gut reaction she couldn't quite explain. Whatever it was, it gnawed at her until she could no longer ignore it. Finally, unable to contain herself any longer, Karen stood up abruptly, smoothing down her floral sundress as if preparing for battle. With purposeful strides, she marched over to Marcus, her flip-flops slapping against the concrete. Her shadow fell over him as she stopped directly in front of his chair. Marcus lowered his book slowly, looking up at her with a mixture of curiosity and mild irritation. Before he could say anything, Karen spoke, her voice cutting through the tranquil ambiance like a knife. "Excuse me?" she began, her tone clipped and accusatory. "Do you work here?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus blinked, surprised by both her rudeness and the absurdity of the question. Setting his book aside, he sat up straighter, meeting her gaze evenly. "No, I don't," he replied calmly. "Why do you ask?" Karen hesitated for a fraction of a second, thrown off by his composure. Most people would have stammered or become defensive, but Marcus exuded a quiet authority that unnerved her. Undeterred, she pressed on, her voice rising slightly. "Well, If you don't work here, then I'm not sure you're supposed to be using this pool. She gestured vaguely toward the water, as if it belonged exclusively to her. It's for residents only. Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. I am a resident, he said simply, keeping his tone neutral. So, yes, I'm allowed to be here. Karen frowned, clearly dissatisfied with his answer. Are you sure about that? She challenged, skepticism dripping from every word. Because I've never seen you around before. At this point, other residents had begun to take notice. A few heads turned in their direction, curious about the brewing confrontation. Some whispered among themselves while others continued lounging but kept one ear tuned to the exchange. Marcus, however, remained unfazed. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. I'm sure, he said firmly, his deep voice carrying just enough weight to command attention. Is there something else you'd like to discuss? Karen faltered for a moment, caught off guard by his unwavering confidence. Still, she refused to back down. Crossing her arms over her chest, she shot back, Well, maybe you should double-check your lease agreement or whatever, because this is a private pool, and I don't think just anyone can waltz in here and use it. The challenge in her tone was unmistakable, but Marcus wasn't interested in escalating the situation. Instead, he reached for his phone, scrolling briefly before showing her a digital copy of his lease agreement. Here, he said, holding up the screen. Does this look official enough for you? Karen squinted at the document, her face flushing red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. That doesn't prove anything, she muttered dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away his explanation. Anyone can fake something like that. By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn in by the drama unfolding before them. Whispers filled the air, some sympathetic to Marcus, others siding with Karen. One elderly woman shook her head disapprovingly, muttering, "This is ridiculous." A teenage boy filming the scene on his phone smirked as he zoomed in on Karen's increasingly flustered expression. Marcus, for his part, remained remarkably composed. He knew when someone was digging themselves into a hole, and Karen was doing exactly that. Leaning back in his chair once more, he folded his arms across his chest and fixed her with a steady gaze. Look, he said evenly. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm minding my own business, same as everyone else. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should take it up with management. Karen opened her mouth to retort, then closed it again, visibly struggling to come up with a response. For all her bluster, she hadn't expected this level of resistance. And deep down, a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered that she might have made a mistake. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, her frustration boiling over. Fine, she snapped. I'll do just that. Someone needs to set the record straight around here. With that, she spun on her heel and stalked back to her chair, leaving Marcus sitting quietly, watching her go with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Little did Karen realize she had just picked a fight with the wrong person. And soon, she would learn exactly who she was dealing with, in the most unexpected way possible. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the pool area. Marcus had been quietly enjoying his book, occasionally glancing up to watch the ripples on the water's surface. It was one of those rare moments when he could truly relax without the weight of meetings, contracts, or deadlines pressing down on him. But just as he turned another page, he felt a presence hovering nearby. Looking up, he saw Karen standing there, arms crossed and lips pursed tightly together. Her expression wasn't friendly. It was more like she'd caught him doing something wrong. Excuse me, Karen said sharply, her voice cutting through the peaceful hum of the afternoon. She pointed a finger at Marcus, her tone dripping with accusation. Do you work here? Because if not, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be using this pool. Marcus blinked, momentarily taken aback by her abruptness. He set his book down gently on the lounge chair beside him and sat up straighter. For a moment, he considered whether he'd misheard her. After all, he hadn't done anything unusual, just sitting by the pool like anyone else would. Still, he decided to respond politely. I live here, he replied calmly, meeting her gaze evenly. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of curiosity beneath it. Why did she assume he didn't belong? Karen tilted her head slightly, clearly skeptical. "Oh, really?" she said, drawing out the words as though they were laced with doubt. "You live here? In this complex?" Marcus nodded, unfazed by her skepticism. "Yes, ma'am, I do." But Karen wasn't convinced. Instead of backing off, she leaned in a little closer, her posture stiffening. "Well, I've never seen you around before," she said, her tone now carrying an edge of defiance. "And trust me, I'd remember someone like you." The implication hung heavy in the air, though she didn't outright say what she meant. By now, a few other residents had started to take notice of the exchange. A young couple lounging nearby paused their conversation to glance over, while a group of teenagers playing volleyball stopped mid-game to see what was happening. Even the lifeguard perched high above the pool looked down curiously, shading his eyes against the sunlight. The tension between Marcus and Karen was becoming impossible to ignore. Marcus, however, remained composed. He wasn't about to let her attitude rattle him. With a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he said, "I keep to myself most of the time. Maybe that's why you haven't noticed me." Karen scoffed loudly, shaking her head as though his explanation was absurd. "That doesn't add up," she shot back. "This is a private pool for residents only. If you lived here, we'd have seen you before today. People don't just show up out of nowhere." At this point, Marcus realized that no matter how reasonable he tried to be, Karen wasn't going to listen. There was something deeper driving her behavior, something beyond logic or facts. He sighed softly, leaning back in his chair. "Look," he said, his voice still calm but firmer this time. "I'm allowed to be here. You don't need to worry about it." But Karen wasn't ready to drop the subject. In fact, her frustration seemed to grow with every passing second. She planted her hands on her hips and raised her voice slightly, enough to draw even more attention from the growing crowd. "Worry about it? Are you kidding me? This is my home, and I pay good money to live here. I deserve to know who's using our facilities." Her words echoed across the pool area, making several people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about what might happen next. One older woman shook her head disapprovingly, muttering under her breath about how rude Karen was being. But Karen either didn't notice or didn't care. She was too focused on proving her point. Marcus studied her for a moment, trying to understand where this hostility was coming from. Sure, strangers sometimes questioned each other in shared spaces like this, but Karen's reaction felt different. It wasn't just curiosity or concern. It was something sharper, more personal. And yet, instead of letting anger creep into his own demeanor, Marcus chose to remain patient. He reached for his phone, unlocking it casually. "Fine," he said, holding up the screen so Karen could see. "Here's my lease agreement. Does that satisfy you?" Karen squinted at the document displayed on his phone, her brow furrowing deeply. She hesitated for a split second, then waved her hand dismissively. "I can't read that from here," she snapped. "Besides, how do I even know that's real? Anyone can fake something like that these days." Now it was Marcus's turn to feel exasperated. He clenched his jaw briefly, resisting the urge to argue further. What more could he possibly do to convince her? He'd already shown her proof, answered her questions, and maintained his composure throughout the entire ordeal. Yet none of it mattered to Karen. To her, he was still an outsider, a problem to be dealt with. As the confrontation dragged on, the atmosphere around the pool grew tense. The once relaxed vibe of the afternoon had evaporated completely, replaced by awkward silence and uneasy stares. Marcus knew he had two options: continue engaging with Karen and risk escalating the situation, or walk away and leave her ranting to herself. Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from over. Karen's accusations grew louder, her words slicing through the air like a knife. By now, nearly everyone at the pool had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. Some stood frozen in place while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. The lifeguard, who had been lazily scanning the water moments earlier, leaned forward on his perch, his attention fully fixed on the escalating confrontation. Marcus could feel the weight of all those eyes on him, but he refused to let it shake him. He'd dealt with difficult situations before, business negotiations that stretched for hours, clients who demanded the impossible, but this was different. This wasn't about logic or compromise. It was about something deeper, something uglier. Karen wasn't just questioning his right to be there. She was challenging his very existence in that space. And no matter how calm he tried to remain, the tension in the air was palpable. "You're not fooling anyone," Karen continued, her voice rising even higher. "If you really lived here, you'd know how things work around here. You'd know the rules. But you don't, do you?" She jabbed a finger toward him, her movements sharp and deliberate. "So why don't you stop wasting everyone's time and admit you don't belong?" Marcus exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. He didn't want to stoop to her level, but her relentless attacks were starting to wear on him. Still, he kept his tone measured as he responded. "I've already told you, I live here. I'm allowed to use the pool. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should take it up with management." At this, Karen let out a harsh laugh, throwing her head back dramatically. "Management? Oh, please, don't act like you actually care about following the rules. People like you always think you can just waltz in wherever you want without consequences." Her words hit hard, though Marcus did his best not to show it. People like you carried a sting that couldn't be ignored, even if she hadn't explicitly said what she meant. Around them, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. A few people nodded along with Karen, agreeing with her unspoken implications. Others looked away, unwilling to meet Marcus's gaze. The divide was clear. Some believed Karen's version of events, while others weren't so sure. But Marcus wasn't going to let her define him, or dictate his worth. He stood up slowly, towering over Karen despite her attempts to appear intimidating. His presence commanded respect, and for a brief moment, she faltered, taking half a step backward. "Listen," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the onlookers. "I don't owe you an explanation. I'm not here to cause trouble, and I'm certainly not here to argue with someone who's made up their mind before hearing the facts. So if you'll excuse me, I'd like to enjoy my afternoon in peace." His words hung in the air, heavy with finality. For a second, it seemed like Karen might back down. Her mouth opened slightly, as though she were searching for a retort, but nothing came out. Instead, she crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her face reddening with frustration. She wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. Most people caved under her pressure, either apologizing profusely or slinking away in embarrassment. But Marcus wasn't most people. The silence was broken when one of Karen's neighbors, a middle-aged man named Greg, stepped forward. He'd been watching quietly from the sidelines until now, sipping a soda and observing the drama unfold. "Come on, Karen," he said, attempting to sound conciliatory. "Maybe we should give him the benefit of the doubt. He says he lives here, and he showed us his lease. Isn't that enough?" Karen whipped around to face Greg, her expression incredulous. "Benefit of the doubt? Seriously? You're just going to trust some stranger who shows up out of nowhere and expects us to believe him? What if he's lying? What if he's trying to scam us or something?" Greg raised his hands defensively, clearly not wanting to get dragged into the argument. "Hey, I'm just saying, maybe we shouldn't jump to conclusions, that's all." But Karen wasn't interested in reason, not anymore. Her focus zeroed back in on Marcus, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Walking around like you own the place, acting all high and mighty. Well, let me tell you something. You don't scare me, not one bit." Marcus shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and frustration flickering across his face. "I'm not trying to scare you," he replied evenly. "I'm just trying to live my life without being harassed every time I step outside. Is that too much to ask?" The question hung unanswered as Karen opened her mouth to fire back another retort, but before she could speak, a new voice joined the fray. It belonged to Lisa, a young mother who often brought her kids to the pool in the evenings. She had been sitting quietly with her toddler on her lap, but now she stood up, her cheeks flushed with indignation. "Karen, enough," Lisa exclaimed, her voice ringing out loud and clear. "This is ridiculous. You're making a scene over nothing. If he says he lives here, then leave him alone. Stop embarrassing yourself and us by acting like this." For the first time since the confrontation began, Karen looked genuinely flustered. She glanced around at the growing number of disapproving faces, realizing that not everyone was on her side. Still, she refused to admit defeat. "Embarrassing myself?" she snapped, glaring at Lisa. "Oh, that's rich. I'm just trying to protect our community. Someone has to stand up for what's right." Lisa rolled her eyes, shaking her head in disbelief. "Protecting the community? Please. You're just causing drama where there doesn't need to be any. Let it go, Karen. Really." The exchange left Karen fuming, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to lash out, to defend herself against the mounting criticism, but she knew she was losing ground. The tide had turned against her, and there was no way to regain control of the situation. Reluctantly, she took a step back, muttering, under her breath, about how unfair everything was. Meanwhile, Marcus took the opportunity to reclaim his seat by the pool. He picked up his book, pretending to focus on the pages, though his mind was still buzzing with everything that had just happened. He knew this wasn't over, not completely. Karen wasn't the type to let things drop easily. But for now, at least, the immediate storm had passed. As the crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their conversations and activities, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. He had come to the pool to relax, to escape the stresses of his busy life for a few hours. Instead, he'd found himself embroiled in a confrontation that revealed far more about society than he cared to confront. And yet, amidst the frustration and tension, there was also a glimmer of hope, a reminder that not everyone was willing to turn a blind eye to injustice. Little did Marcus, or anyone else, know that the real twist was yet to come. The confrontation had simmered down, but the tension still lingered in the air like a storm cloud refusing to pass. Marcus sat quietly by the pool, his book open on his lap, though he wasn't really reading. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the past hour and trying to make sense of it all. He didn't want to dwell on Karen's words or the way some people had sided with her without knowing the truth. But it was hard to ignore the sting of being treated as an outsider in a place where he truly belonged. Karen, meanwhile, had retreated to a corner of the pool area with her children, muttering under her breath and glaring daggers at Marcus whenever she thought no one was looking. She felt humiliated, cornered by Lisa's sharp rebuke and the disapproving stares of other residents. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but more than that, she was angry. Angry at Marcus for making her look bad. Angry at Lisa for calling her out, and angry at herself for letting things spiral so far out of control. Still, she couldn't shake the conviction that she'd been right to challenge him. After all, how could someone like him possibly live here? But Marcus wasn't about to let this moment define his day, or his dignity. Taking a deep breath, he decided enough was enough. If Karen wanted to play games, fine. But he wasn't going to sit idly by and let her assumptions go unchecked any longer. Slowly, he rose from his chair, straightening to his full height. The movement caught Karen's attention immediately, and she stiffened, watching him warily as he approached. "Look," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm, carrying just enough authority to silence the murmurs around them. "I've tried to handle this politely because I don't enjoy unnecessary conflict. But since you seem determined to keep pushing this, I'll make one thing very clear." He paused, locking eyes with Karen, who suddenly looked uneasy. "You might want to reconsider your attitude, ma'am, because I own this entire complex." The words landed like a thunderclap, echoing through the pool area and leaving everyone stunned into silence. For a moment it felt as though time itself had frozen. Faces turned toward Marcus, wide-eyed and slack-jawed as they processed what he just said. Even Karen, who had been gearing up for another round of accusations, seemed to shrink before their eyes. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. It was as if her brain refused to compute what she'd heard. What are you talking about? She finally managed to stammer, her voice trembling. That can't be true. You're lying. Marcus didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a folder containing documents related to the property, purchase agreements, ownership certificates, renovation plans. He flipped it open casually and held it up for her to see. Does this look fake to you? He asked, his tone dripping with quiet confidence. Because if you'd like, I can arrange a meeting with my lawyer to explain everything in detail. Maybe over coffee? Or perhaps during eviction proceedings? The mention of eviction hit Karen like a punch to the gut. Her face went pale, and she stumbled backward, clutching the edge of a nearby lounge chair for support. Eviction? She whispered, her voice barely audible. You wouldn't do that, would you? Marcus shrugged, his expression unreadable. That depends. If residents feel comfortable behaving disrespectfully and spreading baseless accusations, then maybe they aren't the right fit for this community. I pride myself on maintaining a welcoming environment for everyone, not just certain types of people. His gaze swept across the crowd, lingering briefly on those who had supported Karen earlier. Some looked ashamed, while others quickly averted their eyes, unable to meet his stare. By now, whispers were erupting among the onlookers, growing louder with each passing second. People exchanged shocked glances, piecing together the implications of what Marcus had revealed. A few even pulled out their phones, snapping photos or recording videos of the scene. Word spread fast in situations like this, especially in tight-knit communities where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Lisa, the young mother who had defended Marcus earlier, stepped forward again, shaking her head in disbelief. Wow, she said, addressing the crowd as much as Karen. I can't believe this is happening. All this drama over nothing, and now we find out he owns the whole place? Talk about eating crow. Karen shot her a venomous glare but said nothing. She knew she was trapped, and worse, she knew everyone was watching. The same neighbors who had nodded along with her accusations earlier were now avoiding her gaze entirely. Some even scooted their chairs farther away, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional rift forming between them. Greg, the man who had initially suggested giving Marcus the benefit of the doubt, cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, he began, scratching the back of his neck. This changes things, doesn't it? I mean, if Marcus owns the building, then obviously he has every right to be here. No question about it. Yeah, no kidding, chimed in another resident. A college student named Tyler who had been quietly observing from the sidelines. If anything, you're the one trespassing, Karen. You're the one causing problems. Karen flinched at the jab, her fists clenching tightly at her sides. She wanted to argue, to deny everything and insist that Marcus was lying, but deep down she knew it was futile. The evidence was undeniable, and the tide had turned completely against her. The smug superiority she'd worn like armor throughout. The confrontation had crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. As the reality sank in, Karen's bravado gave way to panic. Okay, she said hurriedly, holding up her hands in surrender. Maybe I jumped to conclusions. I'm sorry if I offended you. Really I am. I didn't realize. I had no idea. Her voice trailed off lamely, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to press further, to hold her accountable for the ugliness she'd unleashed. But he also recognized that prolonging the confrontation wouldn't serve any purpose. Besides, the damage was already done, not just to Karen, but to the fragile trust within the community. What mattered now was moving forward. Apology accepted, he said finally, his tone neutral. But let this be a lesson, for all of us. We're living in a shared space, and respect goes both ways. I expect everyone to treat each other with kindness and fairness regardless of who they are or where they come from. Is that understood? A chorus of murmured agreements rippled through the crowd, though Karen remained silent, her face flushed with shame. She gathered her things quickly, ushering her children toward the exit without making eye contact with anyone. As she disappeared around the corner, the pool area erupted into hushed conversations, speculations, and debates about what had just happened. For Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. Yes, he'd proven his point and silenced Karen's accusations, but the incident left a sour taste in his mouth. It reminded him of the countless times he'd faced similar prejudice throughout his life, moments when people judged him not for who he was, but for the color of his skin or the assumptions they made about him. And while he appreciated the support of those who had stood by him, he couldn't help but wonder how many others had silently agreed with Karen, too afraid to speak up either way. Still, he chose to focus on the positive. This was an opportunity, a chance to reshape the culture of the community and foster a sense of unity and understanding. As he settled back into his chair, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the pool deck, Marcus resolved to use this experience as a stepping stone toward something greater. Little did he know, the ripple effects of this confrontation were only beginning to unfold. The days following the poolside confrontation felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. News of the incident spread far beyond the confines of the apartment complex, thanks in large part to social media. Someone had recorded Karen's accusations and Marcus's subsequent revelation about owning the property, and within hours the video went viral. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as yet another example of racial profiling in everyday life. Headlines like "Woman Demands Black Man Leave Pool," only to learn he owns it, dominated online feeds, sparking heated discussions across comment sections and forums. Marcus found himself at the center of a firestorm. Messages poured into his inbox from strangers praising him for handling the situation with grace and composure. Some shared their own stories of being unfairly judged or excluded based on race, while others thanked him for shining a light on an issue that many still struggled to acknowledge. At first, Marcus was overwhelmed by the attention. He hadn't sought out this kind of spotlight, but he recognized its potential to spark meaningful change. After consulting with his team, he agreed to sit down for a brief interview with a local journalist, hoping to use the platform responsibly. During the interview, Marcus spoke candidly about his experience. Sitting in his office, a sleek, modern space adorned with awards and photos of his family, he explained how incidents like these were all too common in his life. "It's not just about what happened at the pool," he said, leaning forward slightly. "It's about the assumptions people make without even realizing it. I've worked hard to build my career, to create opportunities for myself and others, but none of that seems to matter when someone decides I don't belong. And that's frustrating, not just for me, but for everyone who faces similar challenges every day." His words resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom praised him for addressing the broader implications of the incident rather than focusing solely on Karen. But while Marcus became a symbol of resilience and dignity, Karen faced public backlash unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Her name and face were plastered across social media, accompanied by harsh criticism and ridicule. Memes mocking her behavior circulated widely, and some neighbors even started petitions calling for her eviction. For Karen, the aftermath was unbearable. She avoided leaving her apartment, terrified of encountering judgmental stares or confrontations from other residents. When she did venture outside, she kept her head down, clutching her grocery bags tightly, as though bracing for impact. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. Even her children noticed the shift. They complained about feeling ostracized at school, where classmates taunted them about their mother's actions. Eventually, Karen decided to issue a public apology. In a short statement posted on Facebook, she claimed she never intended to cause harm and insisted her comments had been misinterpreted. She described herself as a victim of cancel culture and accused Marcus of using the situation to gain publicity. Predictably, her apology fell flat. Critics dismissed it as insincere, pointing out that she failed to take full responsibility for her behavior. Instead of repairing her reputation, the post only fueled further outrage. Back at the apartment, Complex, the atmosphere remained tense but tinged with hope. Many residents were eager to move past the drama and rebuild a sense of community. Inspired by Marcus's call for unity during the confrontation, Lisa, the young mother who had defended him, took the initiative to organize a meeting. She invited everyone to gather in the clubhouse to discuss ways they could foster inclusivity and mutual respect moving forward. To her surprise, nearly half the building showed up, including some who had initially sided with Karen. The meeting began awkwardly, with attendees exchanging hesitant glances and fidgeting in their seats. Marcus arrived late, having deliberately waited to let others speak first. When he finally walked in, the room fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the sight of his neighbors gathered together, not as adversaries but as participants in a shared mission. Then, with a small smile, he took a seat near the front. Lisa kicked things off by acknowledging the elephant in the room. "We've all seen what happens when fear and misunderstanding take over," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the topic. "But we also have a chance to learn from it, to grow stronger as a community. That starts with listening to each other and recognizing our differences as strengths, not threats." Her words set the tone for the rest of the discussion. One by one, residents stood up to share their thoughts. Some expressed regret for not speaking up sooner, admitting they'd stayed silent out of discomfort or fear of conflict. Others talked about their own experiences with prejudice, both inside and outside the complex. A few admitted they'd doubted Marcus at first, only to feel ashamed once the truth came out. Through it all, Marcus listened intently, nodding occasionally, but mostly letting others guide the conversation. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus chose his words carefully. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm and sincere. "This isn't easy. Facing uncomfortable truths and working toward change never is. But I believe in second chances and I believe in the power of forgiveness. What happened at the pool was painful, but it doesn't define us. We get to decide how we move forward, from here together." His speech earned applause, though it was clear that healing would take time. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked closely with Lisa and other volunteers to implement initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity. They organized potluck dinners where residents could mingle and share stories, hosted workshops on cultural sensitivity, and created a bulletin board in the lobby featuring photos and bios of community members. The goal was simple: to remind everyone that behind every door lived a person with dreams, struggles, and aspirations worth celebrating. Meanwhile, Karen quietly packed her belongings and submitted a notice to vacate the premises. Though no formal action had been taken against her, she couldn't bear the thought of staying in a place where she felt so unwelcome. On the day she left, Marcus spotted her loading boxes into a moving truck. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and he offered a polite nod. Whether it was acknowledgement, forgiveness, or simply closure, neither of them could say. But as the truck pulled away, Marcus felt a sense of relief, not because she was gone, but because the chapter was finally closing. In the end, the incident served as a catalyst for growth, not just for the residents of the apartment complex, but for Marcus himself. It reinforced his belief in the importance of leading with empathy and integrity, even in the face of adversity. And while he knew there would always be challenges ahead, he also knew that progress was possible, one conversation, one connection, and one step at a time. As the weeks turned into months, the apartment complex began to transform in subtle but significant ways. The initiatives Marcus and Lisa had spearheaded started bearing fruit, creating a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. Residents, who once kept to themselves, now greeted each other warmly in the hallways. Strangers became friends over shared meals at potluck dinners, swapping stories about their lives, families, and cultures. The pool area, once the site of tension and conflict, became a symbol of healing, a place where laughter echoed more often than arguments. Marcus took pride in watching these changes unfold. He wasn't naive enough to think everything was perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness or misunderstanding, as there always are when people from different backgrounds come together. But what mattered most was the effort everyone was making. People were listening to one another, asking questions, instead of jumping to conclusions and finding common ground despite their differences. It wasn't just about avoiding drama, it was about building something meaningful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Marcus stood by the pool, observing the scene around him. A group of children splashed playfully in the shallow end while their parents chatted nearby, cups of lemonade in hand. Someone had brought out a Bluetooth speaker, filling the air with soft music. Even Greg, the same neighbor who had initially hesitated to challenge Karen, was involved, cracking jokes that made everyone laugh. It was a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere of that fateful afternoon months ago. Lisa approached Marcus, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She handed him one with a smile. "Looks like things are finally turning around," she said, glancing around at the lively gathering. "I never thought I'd see this place so alive." Marcus chuckled softly, taking a sip of his drink. "Me neither," he admitted. "But it's proof that change is possible if we're willing to work for it. Everyone here has put in the effort and it shows." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "Still, it's hard not to think about how far we've come since, well, that day at the pool." She hesitated, unsure if she should bring up the incident directly, but Marcus didn't seem bothered. If anything, he appreciated her honesty. "Yeah, I think about it sometimes too," he said after a moment. "Not because I'm holding on to any bitterness, but because it reminds me why this matters. What happened back then wasn't just about me or Karen. It was bigger than that. It was about breaking down walls and challenging the assumptions we all carry, whether we realize it or not." Lisa tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Do you ever wonder what Karen's doing now? Or if she regrets how things went down?" Marcus shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "Honestly, I don't spend much time thinking about her anymore. I hope she's doing okay. Everyone deserves a chance to grow and learn. But my focus is here, on this community, on making sure something like that doesn't happen again." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, and soon they joined the others by the pool, laughing and sharing stories late into the night. For Marcus, it was a reminder of how far they'd come, not just as individuals, but as a collective. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared entirely, but they were fading, replaced by new memories built on trust and understanding. In the broader world outside the apartment complex, the story continued to resonate. Local schools used it as a case study during diversity workshops, encouraging students to reflect on their own biases and behaviors. Community leaders cited Marcus's response as an example of leadership under pressure, emphasizing the importance of staying calm and composed in difficult situations. Even national media outlets revisited the incident periodically, highlighting updates from the complex and interviewing residents about the positive changes they'd witnessed. For Marcus, the attention was both flattering and humbling. He received invitations to speak at conferences and events, sharing his perspective on topics ranging from racial equity to community building. At first, he was hesitant to take on such a public role, worried it might overshadow the quieter, personal work happening within his own neighborhood. But eventually, he realized that his story could inspire others to confront prejudice in their own lives, and maybe even spark similar transformations elsewhere. One particularly memorable event took place at a downtown auditorium packed with hundreds of attendees. As Marcus stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. He smiled graciously, waiting for the noise to die down before beginning his speech. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, his voice steady and warm. "When I agreed to share my story, I did so because I believe in the power of storytelling to create change. Stories remind us that we're not alone, that our struggles connect us even when they feel isolating. My experience at the pool wasn't unique. It happens every day to countless people across the country. What made it different was the way we chose to respond. Not just me, but everyone who decided to step up and make a difference." He paused, scanning the audience. Faces of all ages and backgrounds stared back at him, some nodding in agreement, others scribbling notes furiously. We can't control what other people say or do, he continued, but we can control how we react. We can choose to let anger consume us, or we can use it as fuel to build bridges instead of walls. That's what happened in my community. And while the journey isn't over, I'm proud of how far we've come. The speech earned a standing ovation, cementing Marcus's status as a voice for positive change. Yet despite the accolades, he remained grounded, refusing to let fame distract him from his true priorities. His heart belonged to the apartment complex, the place where he'd grown up, the place he'd worked so hard to revitalize. It was home, plain and simple. Back at the complex, life moved forward in its own rhythm. New residents moved in, bringing fresh energy and perspectives. Old traditions merged with new ones, creating a vibrant tapestry of shared experiences. The bulletin board in the lobby overflowed with photos, announcements, and messages of gratitude. One note written in colorful markers summed it up perfectly. This is more than a building, it's a family. Marcus couldn't have agreed more. Standing on his balcony one evening, he looked out over the courtyard below. Children chased each other through the grass, couples strolled hand in hand, and neighbors chatted animatedly on benches. The sound of laughter filled the air, mingling with the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to reflect on everything that had transpired: the confrontation, the fallout, the rebuilding. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The apartment complex wasn't perfect, but it was better, stronger, kinder. And that was something worth fighting for. As he turned to head back inside, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He knew challenges would arise again. Life always threw curveballs, but he also knew that the foundation they'd built would hold strong. Together, they had proven that even in the face of adversity, compassion and understanding could prevail, and that, he thought with a quiet smile, was the greatest victory of all.